Savior. Written by Sparrow9642. Chapter 4. Bonding. A sudden stop is what awoke Twilight from her short slumber. It took her a minute to recollect all of the events of the past hours, nearly jumping at the sight of sunset in the driver's seat, but calmed her nerves quickly once she knew she wasn't in danger. She had been somewhat forced into her current position, that was true, but the fact that she was still alive said enough that Sunset had no malicious intent in this whole matter. She glanced at the stereo for the time, the neon numbers spelling out 6:36 a.m., and stretched her limbs before saying anything. "Where are we?" Twilight asked groggily. Sunset responded by killing the engine and turning to Twilight with a calm expression. "Quick pit stop," Sunset said quickly. "If you want to live, we're going to have to find a way to coat your scent. Otherwise, we're both easy prey." "My scent?" Twilight replied in confusion. "I'm sorry if I smell bad, but when you get hijacked to a hospital and somewhere else by a complete stranger, you don't exactly have time to freshen up. You smell no better, Miss Firehair." Sunset only grunted in annoyance. "That's the problem. You don't smell bad. You're practically a beacon for the monster who is tracking you." Twilight only raised an eyebrow, to which Sunset only let out a long sigh. "I'm going to state this for the record, seeing I know you'll try to run. If I wanted to kill or hurt you, you wouldn't have even made it to the hospital that night at the party." Twilight's eyes went wide from that statement as Sunset continued. "Keep that in mind the entire time we're here, and stay close." With that, Sunset opened the driver door and got out of the car. Twilight hesitantly followed, stepping out into the large parking lot and shutting her car door. One turn of her head confirmed where they were, a giant neon sign spelling out Hallmart engulfing Twilight's vision. It was a large supercenter that sold almost everything, but Twilight had normally only shopped at this particular place for 3 things: food, clothes, and makeup. She wasn't one for the many other products sold there. "I suggest you put that hood up and keep it up," Sunset advised, referring to Twilight's hoodie that she had dressed herself with before driving off with Officer Dixon. Twilight was surprised to see that Sunset had done a mild wardrobe change, now dressed in a standard gray hoodie with her hair pulled up into a ponytail. "You want to keep your identity hid as much as possible against your assailant. They aren't stupid enough to not look at camera footage as a tracking method." "May I ask who exactly is tracking me?" Twilight asked with slight sternness. "When we're safe, I'll tell you," Sunset responded sternly. "For now, it's best we get this over with. Now, hood up." Twilight grunted with irritation, but she listened and put her hood up, tightening it with all of her hair tucked inside. With their identities somewhat concealed, the 2 young women made their way from the parking lot to the sliding door entrance of the supermarket, walking in with ease. They were greeted by the many sounds of distant chatter, beeps of checkout scanners, and the tunes of whatever station was playing through the store's speakers as Sunset hastily rushed to where she could see the aisles and read what each contained. She specifically was looking for the perfume section, and it didn't take long for her to spot it, being just a few aisles down to her right. She double-checked that Twilight was with her before rushing off anywhere else, being relieved that Twilight had listened and this pit stop wasn't going to end up a goose chase. Now aware that her accomplice was with her, she led Twilight to the preferred aisle, the pungent, lingering essence of mixed perfumes making it evident enough. "Pick as many as you want, but make sure it's damn strong," Sunset commanded. Twilight wasn't sure how to take Sunset's words, hesitating before speaking. "Any of them? You are paying, right?" Twilight questioned. "Yes. Don't worry, I can cover the funds, Twilight. Now start grabbing," Sunset assured. "Just be absolutely sure that they are strong. Very strong. Well, okay then. Twilight finished with hesitation. Twilight had no particular favorite perfume, seeing she normally didn't wear it, and as she eyed the shelves of various women fragrances, all she could focus on were the price tags. $50, $60, $100. The $100 one was a bundle pack labeled Her Choice, which made Twilight restore faith in marketing. Nobody should have to pay that much for any fancy spray that probably smelled terrible. Twilight focused again and just started grabbing a variety of different perfumes from the shelves. She stopped at 10 and held the separate scented boxes against her chest, to which Sunset assisted, taking half of the luggage. Alright, let's check out and get out of here, Sunset commanded, and Twilight nodded in return. The two found the closest self-checkout aisle nearby and quickly scanned each item, the end price coming to $412.67. Twilight's eyes bulged at the end number, but Sunset didn't share the same reaction, having stated that she could handle the funds. And she did. She pulled out a black leather wallet from her back pocket of her jeans, and pulled out an insane clump of Benjamins. She counted 5, placing them in the machine and stuffing the rest into the pocket of her wallet, creating a bulge off the surface of her left buttock, and grabbed the bag containing Twilight-scented goodies, urging Twilight to follow. "Don't you want your change?" Twilight asked, still standing at the machine awaiting the deserved change to be given. Sunset approached Twilight with a serious look, a look that made Twilight gulp heavily. "Money is the least of my worries, Twilight," Sunset stated calmly. "Soon, it'll be one of yours too. Now, let's go." Twilight just listened, not wanting to make a scene. She heard the many coins collapsing to the floor from the slots of the self-checkout machine as she came to the exit with Sunset, stopping unexpectedly and pulling out one of her purchases. "Here," Sunset said, handing Twilight a small black box labeled with a neon pink cursive W. "Cover your scent before we go back out there. Better safe than sorry." Twilight didn't object and just slipped open the box, pulling out the rectangular bottle and spraying herself down with 2 sprays. Sunset sighed in annoyance as a response. "Give me the bottle," Sunset commanded with irritation. Twilight handed the bottle to Sunset, quickly removing the brass lid and drowning Twilight with a barrage of sprays. Twilight quickly closed her eyes in panic, coughing from the suffocating smell. Sunset coated her from head to toe, and after about 20 sprays, finally stopped. Twilight continued to cough as Sunset swatted away the fumes toward the ceiling, relieving Twilight somewhat of the smell. "A bit of a warning next time?" Twilight snapped. Sunset chuckled in response. "Now you know what I mean when I say, cover your scent. Just remember, and you won't need a warning." Twilight growled as a way of showing she wasn't finding Sunset's antics funny or helpful, her arms crossed and foot tapping. "You'll get over it," Sunset stated. "Now, let's get out of here. The sooner we're out of town, the better chance we have of having the advantage and more time to plan." Twilight hesitantly followed, exiting the store with Sunset. Sunset did a quick ground check for any danger and was relieved to not find any setbacks. "All clear," Sunset confirmed, quickly leading Twilight back to the car, unlocking the metal trap, and once inside, shedding her body of the hoodie, tossing it into the back seat of Twilight's vehicle. Underneath the attire, Sunset wore a hot pink t-shirt that blended well with her other attire, but that's not what caught Twilight's eye. Peeking from Sunset's right sleeve was what looked like a tattoo of some kind of phrase written in a bizarre language. A language Twilight didn't even recognize, despite all of her studies of different cultures and languages. Sunset caught Twilight staring and quickly addressed what it was, shutting her door. "It's nothing. Just a mistake from my past." she clarified, slipping on her jacket and hiding the marks once again. Sunset hadn't necessarily told a lie. It was a blemish that represented the biggest mistake of her entire life, and after what had happened recently, made it even more disgusting to look at. That's the main reason that she normally wore her jacket, not wanting to see her past mistakes reflect in her eyes. She remained silent as she ignited the car to life and pulled out of the massive parking lot onto the main highway. Twilight decided not to question anything about the supposed tattoo, and after slipping off her hoodie, she sat back in her seat and allowed the ambience of the car's rumbling engine to take her back to sleep. The long drive had come to a halt far outside of Canterlot City, the surroundings only being woodlands on both sides of the road. Sunset wasn't sure where she was going, but she knew that one way to get a major lead on Moleskin and whoever else was behind this was to get out of the area that they normally prefer to hunt. That was the reason she had rushed Twilight so much. From what she had overheard in the woods and knowing how the Royals work, she knew there wasn't much time before Moleskin's plan would go into motion. Considering her keen senses hadn't caught any head or tail of Moleskin or any of his weasels, she knew that she had beaten the odds, but knew that she couldn't make any mistakes from here on. Sunlight peered through the windshield, but Sunset wasn't worried. Unlike the casual vampire tales of sunlight being one of a vampire's greatest weaknesses, it was rubbish to the vampires of reality. However, the warm feeling of the sun caressing her hard flesh made her wince, because she normally avoided the daylight, staying indoors doing other things. As her mother had taught her, she was strongest at night, so day seemed like a nuisance to Sunset. She glanced over at Twilight, still asleep and snoring lightly. This was a good opportunity to find some breakfast while still keeping her true identity hidden from Twilight. Carefully, she opened the car door slowly, hoping that the rusty latches didn't decide to sing out their usual songs. Luckily, she succeeded, closing the door with the same amount of care and turning to the massive forestry accompanied by the sounds of the usual ecosystem of woodlands. She decided to wander a little deeper past where the car was currently rested, both to avoid any chance of Twilight seeing her and to get a better feel for her senses. She navigated deep enough to where she was out of Twilight's sight and turned her focus to her surroundings. She checked all directions up until she found herself a meal of her own, a healthy doe wandering amongst the foliage. Twilight's breakfast would be easy. A couple of eggs resting in a nest would be an easy find. Without any further hesitation, Sunset charged, finding the doe with ease and breaking the neck with no more than a simple tug. The animal yelped at first, but eventually fell limp in Sunset's grasp, allowing her to feast with ease. She wasn't necessarily hungry. Her hunger was mainly overstress and desire for relief, and as her silvery fangs sunk deep into the rough flesh of the mammal, her relief was met, sucking the irony crimson liquid down like a milkshake. At least it was calm, up until the animal jumped into a sudden set of spasms, causing Sunset to jump and blood to splatter everywhere. The majority of it ended up on Sunset, her clothes soaked in dark red and face and hair soaked with splats of the thick liquid. Sunset looked like she had committed a murder, which wasn't a total lie in this case. That didn't matter to Sunset, though. The main problem that had caused her to panic was the fact that she was covered in blood. How the hell was she going to explain this to Twilight? Shit! She cussed aloud. With her frustration somewhat calmed in just one outburst, she resorted to calming down and finding a way out of her current predicament. The last thing she needed to do was panic. Calm down, Sunset, she said to herself with a long sigh. More than likely, there's a river or stream nearby. Just wash it off and it'll be fine. This wasn't her first predicament with a bloody oopsie. She'd only reacted the way she had because of the stress she was under, along with the fact she was currently in the process of protecting her own species' worst enemy from a horrid fate. It was a lot of pressure on her well-being. Now with a plan in mind, she turned her senses in search of a nearby stream, river, or spring. It didn't take long at all, finding a shallow one not far from her current position and quickly dashed in the direction of the water source. It took less than a second to find the spring, proceeding to taking off her clothes. Sunset wasn't worried about any intrusions, seeing the spring was well hid within the forest. A light breeze tickled her skin as she tested the water with her toes, finding the water surprisingly decent and not ice cold. She delved her body into the water, allowing her nerves to finally come to a compromise with the water temperature. Her naked body reacted with a mild set of shivers, but after settling in the water for a good minute, she had adapted with ease. She dunked her head beneath the water, running her hands through her hair violently, free of the blood. The clear water glue a mild tinge of red as she rid her body of the thick liquids that she called food, feeling relaxed from the water's embrace with her body. It was probably the most bliss she'd felt in over a week, before the royals had turned her life into a living hell on Earth. A bliss that captivated her to just take a moment to relax. She listened, and in the time she spent in that spring, she had thought over many things, the main one being her attitude towards Twilight. If she was ever going to earn any shred of trust from Twilight, she needed to stop acting like a drill sergeant and open up more about the situation. The only problem was that she didn't want to have to reveal to Twilight her true identity if it wasn't necessary. She still had no clue why she was even saving her from Moleskin, and was putting her life on the line for a damn mortal. "You have no idea what you're doing, Sunset," she chastised to herself. "But we're here and doing this, so something's gotta give to make even ground possible." With the blood off of her bare body, she proceeded out of the cool water and back up onto the dry ground. She didn't have a towel, so she just allowed the sun to dry her off in the time of soaking her clothes in the water, vigorously scrubbing away the blood of her meal. With her strength, the liquid was off and ridden of in no time, and while the majority of her body was dry, her thick fiery hair was still mildly wet. To fix that, she wringed her fiery locks over and over until it was dry enough, then proceeded to putting her clean attire back on. She was dressed in less than 5 minutes and resorted to listening for nearby birds. Once again, it wasn't long before she found a non-vacant nest and made haste on getting her accomplice a healthy breakfast. "Where the hell have you been?" Twilight objected in absolute arrogance. "I've been here alone for a fucking hour. Do you have any idea what it's like waking up in the middle of nowhere alone?" Sunset walked past the thickets of the woods, up to the car and straight to Twilight. She didn't say anything and just reached into a pocket of her jacket, pulling out 2 speckled eggs and placing them in Twilight's hands. "Yes," Sunset responded, then walked past Twilight. She turned her head back in the direction of Twilight's gaze with a sympathetic look on her face. "I'll make a fire. I need to talk to you about a lot of things anyways." Her voice was low and somewhat sorrowful, causing Twilight to become heavily confused. Her anger over the abandonment in the middle of wherever they were dissipated as she found a nearby rock with a flat surface, and with Sunset's assistance, carried it to the homemade fire pit that Sunset had assembled and ignited with 2 sticks. Less to say, Twilight was impressed. They placed the rock gently into the middle of the pit, hoping the flames would be able to heat the rock like a gas stove. They tested it first with a live leaf from a tree, knowing it wouldn't get eaten to a crisp by the flames. The 2 allowed the flames time to heat the rock to temperature, taking time to talk in their free time, something both of them needed, especially Sunset. Twilight was the first to say something. "So, Sunset, was it? What do you need to talk to me about?" Twilight said with a tinge of irritation. Sunset let out a long sigh amongst the heat of their makeshift stovetop, continuing to stare into the flickering flames. let's just start from the beginning. She started. The night you were attacked, I was nearby. I saw that creep follow your friend's car to the party, and I found his actions abnormal, to say the least. I decided to just stay low profile and monitor his actions closely. Once he knocked you out, that's when I had had enough and used your mace to temporarily weaken him. So, you're some kind of superhero? Twilight said sarcastically. Why didn't you just call the police? And how did you know about my mace? The truth is that I'd been watching him for a while, which meant I had to watch you closely. Otherwise, my cover would have been blown. She lied. Twilight continued to hold the same face, to which Sunset wanted to cuss at fiercely, knowing Twilight was reading right through her terrible lies. Look, despite what happened in my past, nobody is that interested in me, and I have never used my mace except for that one night. Twilight claimed with clear confidence, standing up with her fists clenched. If you continue lying to me, despite all you've done for me, I'll have no reason to trust you one bit. But I am telling the truth, Sunset attempted to plea, failing miserably. Twilight didn't budge on the desperate attempt by Sunset and began storming back to the car, her sneakers crushing the various foliage with might. Sunset stood up, chasing after her and knowing what she needed to say to sway Twilight. Where are you going? Home, Twilight yelled back. You don't even know where we are. You'll get lost or run out of gas trying to get home. I'll take my chances. Twilight was already at the driver's door, and Sunset was running out of options. She had tried her hardest to keep things civil, but now it was clear she'd been left with no choice. Ugh! Do you really want to know the truth? Sunset offered in annoyance. Twilight didn't seize her process of getting into the car, but did answer Sunset. Gladly! Left with no choice, Sunset took in a long breath, then burst out the answer in quick succession. I'm a vampire, and the guy that attacked you that night was too. Sunset confessed. Twilight didn't buy it, chuckling sarcastically at the answer. Wow! First you're a superhero, and now you're a mythological creature? You really are something special, Sunset. If that's even your real name. I can prove it, Sunset claimed. No, I've heard enough bullshit for one day. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll be Her words stopped immediately upon the sight of Sunset, now with her wings spread out wide enough to shade the entire area. She remained airborne as Twilight's face fell from irritated to shocked, and now to fear. Sunset caught the shift in Twilight's expression and quickly attempted to calm the situation. Despite what your kind's literature has told you, not all Her attempt was an absolute fail upon a shriek from Twilight that echoed throughout the massive forest, and her dashing like prey being chased in the opposite direction. Sunset could only sigh in defeat, knowing it was pointless to go after her. She wouldn't listen and would only run faster. That didn't mean she'd given up though, turning her ear in Twilight's direction and listening closely. Twilight navigated through the thick woods frantically, her emotions a mess, sobs escaping her, and her adrenaline on overdrive. All she could think of was running, hiding, and getting away from the creature she had always assumed a work of fiction. Her tears glistened in the rays of sunlight that peeked through the trees as she continued to navigate the thick vegetation with a few trips and falls, her thoughts racing with the sentence, "Why me?" on loop. She felt betrayed, scared, and foolish. First, a guy tries to kill her, then she becomes a suspect of a murder she didn't commit, and lastly, she's foolish enough to let herself get kidnapped by a murderous creature for slaughter. What the hell was she thinking? She just wanted to go home, lock herself in her bedroom, and never come out again. But instead, here she was out in the middle of nowhere, running for her life. At that point, she didn't care if she got snatched by a bear trap, fell into a ditch, or even got eaten by said animal. Upon an abrupt stop to her run, hitting something sturdy and rough, her wish became reality. Despite hitting her head hard off the ground, she could make out what she had run into, and immediately her fear escalated even higher. Standing high above her in an angry state was a massive grizzly bear. Her head pounded like a drum, making her ability to focus accordingly nearly impossible. What she could see, though, was the beast rising on its hind legs, growling down at her in a display of dominance. Unable to concentrate or get up, Twilight did the only thing that came to her mind. She screamed as loud as she could. Sunset almost immediately caught the cry of Twilight's voice and didn't waste a second, dashing to the area as fast as lightning. The bear had started to pounce down towards Twilight, up until Sunset had seized the movement with a good elbow to its jugular, and a kick to its abdomen that sent it back an estimated 40 yards, 5 trees breaking in half like fragile glass upon the creature's impact with them. Twilight was still cowering on the ground when Sunset had turned back to her, still a little delusional from her impact with the ground. Sunset simply held out a hand to help her up, not showing any forceful actions towards Twilight as a way to prove she wasn't going to harm her. Twilight cowered at first, but with a little patience and allowing Twilight to move at her own pace, she eventually succeeded, pulling her up from the forced floor. Twilight didn't seem to run, nor did she show fear towards Sunset. If anything, despite her head hurting, she was baffled from what she'd just seen Sunset perform. In 2 blows, she had taken down a grizzly bear, one of the most lethal animals on the planet. Not to mention, she had kicked it back nearly half the length of a football field, and the force had been so devastating that it had broken trees in half as if they were fragile. It was amazing and intimidating. Instead of wasting time walking back, Sunset just dashed back to their campsite with Twilight on her back, the phenomenon causing Twilight to grow even more amazed as she got off of Sunset's back. "You okay to stand on your own?" Sunset asked. "You took a pretty nasty fall." "Yeah, I'll be okay," she replied, placing her feet on the ground and returning to the fire pit. Her steps were slightly off, but steady enough to where Sunset didn't have to assist. The two took their respective spots around the fire, ready to have a more civil conversation. Twilight was the first to speak again. "Look, Stop, Twilight," Sunset interrupted. "You don't owe me any apologies. I'm the one who needs to apologize." "What?" "I've done nothing but told you lies and forced you to do things. I've been a terrible help in this whole thing." "What are you talking about? You've helped me more than I have you. You saved me at the party, took the liberty to keep me safe from some monster, and now you saved me from getting killed by a bear. I practically owe you my life at this point." "But I could have been better than I was. I was a bossy bitch that treated you terribly. You don't owe me anything except a middle finger, Twilight." Twilight giggled at that, a smile breaking her lips for the first time in Sunset's company. "You may not be wrong about that, but I also know that you were only doing those things to protect me from... Well, the cat's kinda out of the bag now, so..." Sunset giggled as a response, turning to Twilight. "Thanks, Twilight," Sunset said sweetly. "I promise that I'll make a better effort to not be so bossy and forceful. And I'll try to be more nice and make an effort to be less paranoid of your real identity." Twilight followed. Both girls smiled and hugged, up until Twilight jumped at a sudden unexpected discovery. Sunset's body was as cold as ice. "How can you be so cold in this weather?" Twilight exclaimed unintentionally. Sunset pulled back, rubbing the back of her neck with a light blush grazing her face. Sorry, that's a vampire thing. Sunset replied sheepishly. Twilight's eyes went wide with confusion and shock. That'll definitely take some getting used to, she stated. Sunset only chuckled sheepishly, her chuckles being broken by a sudden painful grunt from Twilight. Her right hand met the side of her head, massaging her temple and expressing a painful gesture. You okay? Sunset asked. My head is pounding, Twilight replied. Perhaps I hit the ground harder than I thought. Sunset thought of a way to potentially help Twilight, seeing he wasn't helping. A solution immediately popped into her head as she stood up from the ground. Come on, I know how we can cure your headache, Sunset assured. Twilight only looked up at her with a raised eyebrow. What are you proposing? Twilight questioned. Sunset only held out a hand. Just trust me. Naked? Is that really necessary? Twilight complained. Why can't I just wear my bra and underwear like a swimming suit? If you prefer a wet change of clothes to dress back into, go ahead and do that. But if you want the best experience, you need to go all the way, Sunset replied. Twilight pouted in defeat, her body only covered by her bra and underwear in the mass of trees and vegetation. Sunset was leaning against a tree, just admiring the beauty of the natural body of water, tempted to shed her own attire and go a second round. Fine, but I'm not going any further with you watching me, she pouted in defeat. She pointed to a nearby rock resting on the shoreline, and like an owner addresses their pet, motioned her over to the spot by violently lashing her arm downward with her index finger pointing. Fair enough. Sunset surrendered, walking over to the desired spot. Even if we do share the same anatomy. Sunset! Twilight gasped. I'm kidding. I promise, no peeking until you tell me it's okay to look. Sunset confirmed. Twilight rolled her eyes at the joke, then walked away towards the shoreline to strip further. Not long after, a set of grunts and growls erupted from Twilight, immediately raising Sunset's curiosity, but she just allowed Twilight her privacy as requested. The complaints continued for another minute, up until Sunset decided to intervene on the predicament. Everything okay? It's fine, Twilight said between breaths. This bra just likes to give me trouble sometimes. The grunts continued, so Sunset kept conversation. Do you need help? I swear, Twilight, I'm not interested in catching sight of your, things. No, I got this, Twilight insisted. Another minute passed, and no progress had been made. Sunset just sat and waited for the obvious outcome, hearing tiredness begin to come over Twilight. Another minute, and another, and another, and another. Twilight finally surrendered to her stubborn attire. Sunset? Twilight called out in defeat. Yes? Sunset answered mockingly. A little help, please. Sunset stood from her spot and walked out to find Twilight tangled up and stuck. Sunset had to do all she could to contain her laughter, nearly losing it upon first sight. She stood Twilight back up on her feet and took hold of where her bra strap clipped together, immediately noticing the issue. No wonder you struggle with this one. Your clip is all contorted. Sunset explained. I'm aware of that, Twilight confirmed. It's been that way for a while. Why don't you just go buy a new one? Sunset questioned. That would be easier than whatever you've got going on here. I'm not exactly carrying around a credit card or clumps of $100 bills, Twilight confessed. I rarely get the chance to shop for myself. Sunset rolled her eyes, already having a solution to this issue. That settles it then. Next town we end up in, you're going shopping for some new clothes. Sunset proposed, loosening the clip and watching it break apart to reveal Twilight's back. Twilight caught the bra with her arm, still holding the cups against her chest. There we go, Sunset clarified. Now, I'll just head back over to my little rock so you can undress the rest of yourself. Thank you very much, Twilight stated, waiting for Sunset to take her seat. Then she slipped off her underwear and stepped forward into the cool water. The coolness immediately made Twilight's skin shiver mildly, calming after adapting to the temperature. She had taken her time before going in fully, especially when the spring surface had reached just below her hips, which had caused her to wince and yell out a high-pitched yelp that made Sunset snicker in secrecy. Eventually, Twilight just delved into the water, wanting to just get it over with, and upon her official full dunk into the spring, she yelped again upon surfacing. This time, Sunset couldn't contain her laughter. Twilight didn't share the same reaction. Shut up, she exclaimed in mild anger. Sunset quickly contained her laughter. Sorry, Sunset said through residual chuckles. Something tells me that you don't swim much. I've seen reactions to cold water, but yours was, well, something else. Twilight calmed her anger, allowing her body to become attuned to the water. She kept her body hidden underneath the water with only her head afloat for both privacy and common knowledge reasons. Well, I used to, when I was a kid, Twilight confessed, letting out a sigh. When my life was better, more jovial. Sunset winced at that. This was something that she hadn't expected to come out of Twilight. What do you mean? Sunset questioned with a hint of sympathy. Twilight hesitated before answering, a frown forming in the process. Nothing. Forget it, Twilight concluded, a hint of sadness in her voice. Sunset didn't argue, not wanting to cause any sort of trouble. Instead, she just changed the subject to something similar, but relevant enough. Hey, remember the thing you saw on my arm? Sunset asked. Yeah? What about it? Twilight responded. Well, I didn't necessarily lie when I said it was a mistake from my past, Sunset assured. Twilight winced, allowing Sunset to continue. Sunset followed. The mark is a symbol that only special vampires earn. It was gifted to me by the royals of my kind, back when I didn't know any better about what I was getting myself into. Sunset paused briefly, taking in a long breath. I was a little shit, thinking I was unstoppable. And for a while, I was. But as the saying goes, everyone meets their match. Despite my advanced abilities, I was eventually beaten by the most spoiled brat of my race, Moleskin. The monster that is after you, and the brother of the guy that attacked you at the party. My intervention nearly cost me my life, because meddling in the royals' business is a fatal crime. How did you escape death? Twilight questioned. Sunset nearly lost her breath, remembering the night her mother was coldly taken out of her life by those bastards. My mother. She sacrificed herself for me. Twilight instantly jumped in horror at that, covering her mouth with both of her hands. Oh my god. I'm so sorry, Sunset. Twilight sympathized. If I would've... No, it's okay, Twilight. Sunset assured. You can't hold on to the grief of the past. You need to hold on to what you can still do. The past is impossible to change. Therefore, you need to focus on fixing the present and future. Twilight wasn't very sure how to feel about that, even if Sunset was technically correct about the logic. She had decided to just take the opportunity to turn the conversation from the grim truth she had just been informed about to something less grim. I honestly have felt like I have no life ever since my parents decided to work full-time. Twilight confessed. It feels like I'm alone, and the only thing I have to accompany me is my collection of books. It's the same each and every day, and while I was fine with it at first, after a month, it just got to the point of where I became numb to life in general. A life I don't want to have. Have you told your parents about how you feel? Sunset questioned. I've never gotten the chance. Twilight confessed, a sadness audible in her voice. I would have in the hospital if it weren't for the fact I was jacked up on morphine and stressed out from all that had happened at the party. Any other time, it's just me, school, and home. Sunset expressed a look of sorrow, her biggest desire at that moment to give Twilight a big hug. It was official that she had unlocked a part of Twilight that wasn't normally revealed, giving her hope that she had managed to do what she had aimed for and thought in the spring that morning. I'm sorry to hear that, Twilight. Sunset said sympathetically. Twilight lowered her head to where her mouth was delved under the water's surface, blowing bubbles as a way of expressing her sadness. But trust me when I say that you've got a ton to live for, and I'm going to do all I can to keep you safe from Moleskin and the rest of his cohorts. Twilight rose her mouth from under the water. Can I ask you something, Sunset? Twilight asked. Sure. Sunset simply replied. Why me? Twilight asked. Sunset was confused, raising an eyebrow at the question. What do you mean? Sunset questioned in confusion. What's so special about me that would make you, an immortal ancient vampire with immortal abilities beyond your kind, want to save me? It doesn't seem to make sense logically, seeing humans are the mortal enemy of your kind. Sunset was afraid that that question would eventually come up, seeing the answer was still unclear. She refused to just lie to her again, so she thought deeply about what may have led her here, especially after merely escaping death. Well, if I'm being honest, I actually don't know exactly why. Sunset confessed. Maybe it's to settle a score with Moleskin once and for all, my past self making reckless decisions, or perhaps my mother telling me something. Whatever the reason, I can say one thing, Twilight. I'm happy to have chosen to deceive my own kind, because I don't know what it is, but there's something special about you. That comment had caused Twilight's face to develop a blush, not even expecting that to have ever come out of Sunset's mouth. She was an immortal being with crazy strength, speed, and senses. She was merely a 17-year-old girl that had nothing special to offer or show, so she had no idea if Sunset had drunk some funky blood or was being serious. You give me way too much credit, Twilight said with a chuckle. The only thing I'm good at is being a nerd and a bookworm. Sunset chuckled in return. Don't sell yourself short, Sunset claimed. Perhaps your specialty hasn't shown itself yet. You know now that my senses are more sensitive than any other animal on your planet. So, you know it's not a coincidence if my senses pick up something about you that is special. Twilight couldn't argue with that, knowing full well that arguing with an otherworldly creature was useless and impossible to outmatch. She decided to play along, lying back in the water. What sort of specialty are you sensing inside of me? If your senses are able to determine that. Twilight asked. They aren't. Sunset confirmed. All I know is that you are indeed special. Twilight smiled, feeling warm inside. It was a feeling she hadn't felt in a long time. Thanks, Sunset, Twilight said warmly. While our first meets weren't the best, I'm glad to be here with you too. Despite what I said earlier, this whole mission to save me has made me feel more alive than I've felt in years. For once, that numbness has disappeared. And I have you to thank for that. Sunset blushed, and strangely she found herself shedding a tear. Something she hadn't even anticipated, but didn't see it as something weak or disgusting. It actually felt good to cry happy tears, given the past week of nothing but dread. She had been taught her whole life that mortals were nothing but killers that wouldn't hesitate to end her kind's lives. And while Twilight had run at first, she eventually grew to trust Sunset like a friend. Now they were conversing like normal friends at a lunch table. Friend was the key term that Sunset felt like a son had grown in her body. Seeing every friend she had ever had, aside from her mother and father, were nothing but treacherous asses that used her for her abilities. It was part of how she got tricked into getting stuck with the mark on her arm for the rest of her life. Twilight felt real. She wasn't using her or tricking her. She was being open about her most personal thoughts and wasn't just shrugging aside sunsets like they weren't important. She was listening and understanding, despite what she was in full reality. She wiped away her tears and responded with simple words. I'm glad to hear that, she said with a smile. How's your head? Much better, Twilight responded happily. I think talking and getting things off my chest really helped, though the pain most likely will return. True, Sunset agreed. Why don't we get ready to get moving? We need to cover a lot of ground, because Moleskin has most likely caught on and will be moving at night, so we need to move during the day. Not to mention, we need to refuel the car. And don't think I haven't forgotten about taking you on a shopping trip for some new clothes. Her last set of words came out playfully, to which Twilight giggled at. All right, but before we go... Twilight fell silent amongst the calm of the spring, causing Sunset to wince and wonder, keeping her promise not to peek at her in the nude. Her calm was cut off by a sudden splash of cold water, reacting with a surprised yelp, and turning to where Twilight swam afloat, laughing like a maniac. Twilight! Sunset exclaimed, quickly covering her eyes. Ah, what's the matter, vampire girl? Afraid of a mortal's features? Sunset slowly uncovered her eyes, only to be met with another barrage of cold water. She quickly got the message Twilight was sending, smiling deviously. Oh, that is so it, Sunset said, proceeding to take off her clothes. Twilight panicked, getting a head start to the opposite side of the spring, but Sunset found her quickly, splashing her with an equal amount of the spring's water. Ah! Sunset! Twilight yelled while trying to dodge Sunset's attacks. An onset of giggles from both of them filled the ambience of the forest as they continued to engage in the most serious water war ever recorded in history. Chapter 5. Confessions. A flitter of tattered wings along with a thump stirred Moleskin to full attention, his back turned away from the creature that had disturbed his peace. He opened his closed eyelids to reveal his glowing crimson eyes as he turned to meet his guest, their wings now folded and appearing more like a human, save for their piercing green eyes. Eyes that Moleskin knew all too well. He favored his sudden guest with a sinister smile as he looked them over with a quick movement of his eyes, then walked forward. "Is it done?" Moleskin asked in his cold voice. "Is the girl finally out of my hair so my brother can rest peacefully?" There was a pause, a long and dramatic one that made Moleskin's eyes grow more blood red in the darkness. Dalco eventually found his answer and addressed Moleskin properly. "She's missing. There isn't a soul in the house, and the girl's car is gone." His voice was shaky. Moleskin's glowing gaze died down, figuring there was an easy answer to this. "Perhaps a night on the town?" Moleskin analyzed. "That's fine. We have all the time in the world to wait for her to return, so that's exactly what we'll do." Dalco fidgeted his hand severely upon the reply, and with that, Moleskin's calm demeanor shifted instantly to an angry one. "About that, I had Aloe scout the entire town for the car, and it's nowhere to be found. She's gone somewhere outside the town." Moleskin calmed once again. "That's oddly convenient. No matter. I love a good game of hide-and-seek. It makes the thrill of catching her all the more satisfying in the end. She'll have to come home eventually, and when she does, I'll be happy to rip her throat out and dine on her blood like a royal should with each meal." "So what do we do for now?" Dalco asked. Moleskin held his crooked smile upon response. "I want you to keep a good eye on the house while your brother watches the roads that lead out of the city," Moleskin directed. "Once you see her or the vehicle, I want you to inform me immediately, and seeing the girl try to avoid her fate, I'll take the liberty of finishing her off for good." Dalco bowed as an answer, then took off into the sky, wings spread wide and disappearing in a sudden flash. Moleskin turned to the sight of the full moon, feeling its glow strengthen him like a drug. He had private plans of his own, and upon baring his fangs at the celestial body in the form of a wide grin, he spoke aloud. "But first, I have to make a little visit to the Shimmer residence." He slithered. "This hunt is going to be even better if my assumption is correct." Vladimir Shimmer jumped at the sound of 2 knocks on the door to his home, putting down the novel he had been quite engaged in and placing it on the side table. His first thoughts were who would be visiting him at this time of night, seeing it was late and the majority of nearby kin were locked up for the night, having finished their hunts. "Perhaps Sunset's back early. The door's locked and she wants in the house." That was literally the only option that came to mind as he hurried to the door, coming to it in a split second with a single dash. The door's locks were still unlocked, so that raised suspicion immediately, but he was able to defend himself well, so he just dropped his suspicions, turned the knob, and opened it to the sight of Moleskin. This immediately set off many red flags in his head as he addressed his most unwanted guest. "Lord Moleskin," Vladimir greeted. "Evening, Mr. Shimmer." Moleskin greeted back, his generous tone believable. "I was wondering if Sunset has returned from her hunt yet." Vladimir raised an eyebrow. What's the purpose? You never cared to check on my daughter before, so why now? Moleskin had expected this, and he already had a counter to the argument. The other royals have spotted a gang of rogue vampires within our area, and the younger lords such as myself have been tasked with checking on all of our fellow brothers and sisters. Vladimir didn't buy it, but played along anyway to avoid any unnecessary drama or violence. To be safe, he slowly started to shift into a defensive stance, unknowingly to Moleskin. Oh, well, she left to visit a distant relative a couple days ago. Vladimir confirmed, going off of Sunset's cover-up story to save Twilight. She won't be back for a week or so, and as you and I both know, my daughter is more than capable of handling some rogues. I'm sure she's fine, my lord. Seems like a perfect time for her to vacate the area, Moleskin said mockingly, knowing he had his answer. I thought the same, but you know how Raz is. Be sure to send a reminder when she does return. This rogue situation might last weeks, and we don't want Sunset being attacked or worse by mistake. I'll be sure to do that when she returns, Vladimir concluded. Very good. You have a nice night, Mr. Shimmer. With that, the door closed, and Moleskin pretended to move along to the next tree. Once the coast was clear, Moleskin took off into the sky, planning to return to his home to plan out the next step in his plan. So, Sunset Shimmer decided to harbor a human and interfere with the order of our race yet again. This must be my lucky day. The next town hadn't been too far from where Sunset and Twilight had resided in briefly, and after refueling the car, Sunset had stopped at the closest clothes store. It was a moderately sized store called Ashley's that seemed fitting enough for what she was looking for, and while Twilight had objected, Sunset hadn't struggled the slightest at practically dragging her in. The door emitted the jingle of a small bell upon entering, and the aroma of some sweet berry-scented fragrance drowned both of their nostrils. They approached the counter where a young girl with long blonde hair pulled into a ponytail sat engaged in some fashion magazine, ringing the bell to get her attention. The girl jumped mildly and made eye contact with both of them, smiling greetingly. Hello, welcome to Ashley's, she greeted. My name is Charlotte. How may I be of assistance to you today? Sunset spoke for Twilight, knowing she was the more social butterfly. Hi, my friend needs a new wardrobe and a good variety of it. Sunset greeted back. Do you have a good idea of where we can find that here? Absolutely, Charlotte confirmed. Are you looking for just shirts and pants, or are you looking for that and other bodywear? Both, Sunset assured simply. I see. Charlotte mused. Follow me and we'll get your friend all set. Charlotte stepped out from behind the desk through a side door and approached Sunset specifically. Just her? Charlotte asked. I'm sure we could suit you with something too, dear. Just her. Sunset clarified. I'm good. Very well. Follow me, please. I think I know just what will spice up your friend's style. Both of them did as instructed and followed Charlotte towards the back of the store, mostly composed of women's clothing. The store carried attire for both genders, despite the misleading name, and upon one glance at the price tags, it was clear that their products were far from casual. Sunset wasn't worried about the prices, seeing she had far enough to afford anything being sold. But the deeper she walked into the store, she was starting to get second thoughts about her decision to not buy anything for herself. She had already spotted 10 or more pieces of clothing she wouldn't hesitate to buy on a regular day. While she was a lethal blood-sucking monster, Sunset had a side to her that seemed human. She could surprisingly be very girly in nature, an aspect of her being that she was grateful for. unlike the royals who acted formal and had no sense of fashion, always wearing the same clothing. Outside of Sunset's personal thoughts, Charlotte had started to pile Twilight with a barrage of clothes, to which Twilight struggled to handle and Charlotte was oblivious to. "Oh yes, you'll surely draw eyes with this one. Ah, this is definitely your color. This one will go great with your eyes. This will fit your form fantastically." Charlotte was in her own world. Twilight had attempted many times to stop Charlotte's mindless actions, but Charlotte was moving too fast for her to get a word out, so she just sighed and did her best to keep her balance. Eventually, Charlotte finally stopped and allowed Twilight to gain permanent balance, but nonetheless, Twilight still struggled. "All right, now that we have everything, let's move to the dressing room, shall we, dearie?" I suppose." "Very good. Please follow me." Twilight sighed in defeat. "I'll be out soon, Sunset," Twilight stated through her struggle to hold all the clothing. Sunset chuckled. "All right, see you in a minute." Sunset replied nicely, watching as Twilight was led into the dressing room just off to the side. Twilight disappeared into one of the provided rooms, and Sunset just stood with her arms crossed and a smile on her face. Charlotte joined her shortly, allowing Twilight privacy as much as breathing room. "So, how did you two meet?" Charlotte asked. That question came off in a way Sunset recognized as a deeper curiosity, so she just played nice. "What do you mean by that?" Sunset questioned. "You know, how did you two become—" She made the answer with her fingers, and Sunset immediately caught on. Oh! She chirped, a blush forming on her face. No. We're not, that. We're just friends." Charlotte expressed a grin that made it clear that she wasn't buying Sunset's words. "Your face says otherwise, dear," Charlotte countered. "Blush and all." Sunset's blush only swelled further, causing her to stumble even more with her words. No, the blush is due to me being asked something unexpected. How would you feel if I asked if you were sharing a bed with, I don't know, another employee?" Charlotte merely shrugged her shoulders. "Deny it all you want, but I've seen many faces like yours in my store before, and some have denied, some haven't. However, the result is always the same. No need to be ashamed. She's beautiful." Sunset could only stare blankly. She had no comeback, only silence, and seemed frozen in place. She eventually found her words and broke the silence with a grunt of annoyance, walking like a stomping giant toward the front of the store. She opened the door and stepped outside, taking in the fresh air as if she were suffocating. Her blush still dressed her face as she let out a long sigh of relief. "She's crazy," she stated to herself. "Twilight's just an acquaintance until all of this chaos is put to bed. Nothing more." She pulled her hair back in conflict, feeling guilty for calling Twilight an acquaintance. While it had only been a couple days together, Twilight had become more than just an acquaintance. If she were just that, they wouldn't be shopping at a clothing store as if they were BFFs buying something for a school prom. They'd still be driving and probably would be 5 towns over by now. Yet, here they were. Fine, but Twilight's just a friend. Just a friend. We're nothing more than that. Then, the memory of the spring started to play out. As much as she wanted to deny it, Sunset had felt like there was more than just a friendly connection the entire time they were there, and it wasn't because they were naked. The conversation they had engaged in had felt like more than just a friendly one. It reminded her of when she had serious talks with her mother. From the level of personal information to the level of how comfortable Twilight had been in sharing that information with her, a complete stranger, it had felt like an intimate connection. Something that seemed wrong and impossible, especially considering what she was. Humans were the enemy of her race, so why was Twilight so open and comfortable around her? No, get a hold of yourself. That lady is high in the night. It's against the laws of nature to even think it would be possible. She hung her head and let out another long grunt of irritation. Could it be possible, though? Her conflicts were interrupted by a distant sound grazing her eardrums. A pair of wings that were thicker than a vampire's, wings of a creature she had seen only once in her past, and had caused her to rise to full alert. A seeker. She stated, "Moleskin knows and is on to my plan." She turned back to the storefront, wondering if she should run in and grab Twilight. They were in danger, but the creature was still distant enough for her to travel and take care of. However, she wondered if it was potentially a trap by Moleskin to separate them, seeing he was more than aware that she and Twilight were together. She came up with a solution to that issue quickly, knowing Moleskin was mainly after Twilight. Sunset ran to the car and hastily grabbed Twilight's jacket, tying it around her waist and running to a nearby alleyway. If I have Twilight's jacket, I have Twilight's scent. So if there's another one of Moleskin's weasels trying to chase her down, they'll follow her scent. Can only hope Twilight stays in the store until I get back. Spreading her wings and double-checking that Twilight's jacket was tight on her waist, she took off in the direction of the Seeker. It didn't take very long to find the gargoyle-like creature and knock it from flight into the forest below. The creature landed with a hard thump and quickly rose to action, Sunset meeting it at ground level. The fiend snarled and bared its jagged teeth at Sunset, its red eyes meeting Sunset's in distaste at its interrupted flight. They both danced in a circle up until the Seeker lunged at Sunset with its mouth open and venom-laced tongue lashing. Sunset easily dodged the attack, managing to grab the creature around its neck in flight, and with no more than a mild clench of her grip, broke the creature's neck. It collapsed like a stone and began to flail wildly, whining in the way of an injured animal. Sunset acted quick to soothe the creature, getting on her knees and closing her eyes. Rest. Sunset gently comforted, placing a hand on the creature's belly. The creature's flailing and whining died down like a song's end. Then, like a flame to paper, the corpse ceased its movement and slowly began to disintegrate particle by particle. Sunset felt bad for the creature, knowing it was just another one of Moleskin's pawns in whatever game he was playing, being sacrificed for beneficial gain to his plan. Seekers were fierce creatures with a great sense of smell, mainly used for aiding younger vampires in hunting lessons. Moleskin had mainly used it as a way of accomplishing his goals. Blood for pleasure, a typical trait that the royals shared. Her mother had taught her this method of putting a seeker to rest. Seekers were related to vampires, so being one of their own kin, vampires had a special connection to seekers. This was the most peaceful and merciful way to send them to death, and it personally was painful for Sunset to have done what she'd done. But in the end, it was either her life or the Seeker's. Tears escaped her eyes as she stood back up to her feet and expressed an angry look that was directed at Moleskin. However, something caused her attention to shift, an unwelcome presence. Well, well, if it ain't Shimmerlocks, spoke a familiar voice. Daikin, she addressed, turning to her unexpected guest amongst the foliage. He wore a white t-shirt and casual blue jeans, his brown hair blew in the breeze and his hazel eyes met Sunset's like a beacon. You're not the scent I was following, so tell me, why did I end up finding you rather than the girl I was supposed to find? Daikin was someone that Sunset had met very briefly in her past, but he hadn't changed. He was still as authoritative as their first meet and still straight to the point. "Who sent you?" Sunset questioned. "Well now, Shimmer, that's none of your business," Daikin answered. "It was Moleskin. I know, because he's had it out for that girl ever since his brother was killed by me," Sunset confirmed. Daikin just grunted at that. "Why are you assisting the royals, Daikin?" Sunset questioned. "You know for a fact that they're corrupt and could give a shit less about what happens to any of our kind. They'll shove a knife through your throat as soon as they get what they want. Especially Moleskin." "I could ask the same," Daikin countered. "Why are you assisting our very enemy? The ones who swore to wipe out our existence?" "Because she's different. She isn't out to kill us, and I'm not just going to let Moleskin kill her. Something has to be done about their solutions to peace. They murdered my mother for no goddamn reason. Is that right, Daikin? Is that justice? Truly?" Tears had started to form in Sunset's eyes at the statement about her mother. Daikin hadn't shown any shift in his demeanor, and with that, Sunset knew how this had to end. "As far as I'm concerned, Shimmer, you murdered one of our own for a human. Your mother was a fair trade, and by guarding a human, that makes you a traitor to your own kind. Then I guess you know how this ends." Sunset got into a defensive stance, to which Daikin answered with his own stance. "I'm sorry it had to come to this." Sunset apologized. Then she lunged at Daikin. An exchange of blows were met upon impact, the collision seeming like an explosion to the human eye. The majority were blocked by each, but some got through, and Sunset had been surprised at how much she had been affected by the blows. She actually struggled to hold her stance after some hits, and lost her breath at one specific hit right to her upper chest just below her breasts. That's not to say she hadn't affected Daikin with her own blows. She'd managed to strike him in the face and chest a few times, causing him to falter as much as her. They didn't bleed, just healed if any cuts or lacerations were made in the respective blows. Sunset had received one bad one to her right cheek, which she repaid Daikin with a slash of her knuckles to his left eye. That specific wound had caused Daikin to lose his complete focus and allowed Sunset the advantage, pouncing onto Daikin's chest with extreme force. A set of cracks became audible upon the impact, resulting in a scream of pain from Daikin. Sunset took that opening as an opportunity to pin his arms to the ground, so she quickly acted, pinning Daikin and preventing him from engaging in any further combat. Daikin only laughed at her victory. "What are you going to do now? Kill me?" he questioned mockingly. "Just like you did the Seeker?" Sunset paused, thinking of what to do. Did she truly want to kill another one of her own? If she didn't, she'd just put Twilight in further danger and she'd be guaranteed a rematch with Daikin. She truly just wanted things to just go back to normal, but she also knew that wasn't possible. There was only one solution to this, the very solution she'd stated prior to battling Daikin. "You brought this on yourself," she stated. "The last thing I want is to kill you or anyone else. But you gave me no choice, so accept the consequences of your choice." With a quick swing of her right fist, she struck Daikin with a force powerful enough to snap his neck, an audible snap clarifying her victory. Daikin was gone, banished to limbo forevermore. While she had won, Sunset didn't celebrate. She only fell to the ground in a state of absolute sadness and wept in agony before the body of Daikin, a once honored vampire of her own kind. Twilight had finished up her multiple sessions of dress-up and walked out, only to be greeted by Charlotte, smiling widely. Twilight winced at the sudden encounter, still recovering from the slight aches her arm muscles had endured from all of the clothing Charlotte had stacked her with. "Did you find everything fitting to your liking?" Charlotte questioned with an unhealthy amount of glee. "Surprisingly, yes. I'll take it," Twilight stated. "I knew you'd love them. Right this way, dearie." Charlotte agreed, leading Twilight to the front counter. Along the way, Twilight glanced around, noticing the absence of Sunset, causing her to panic slightly. "Where's Sunset?" Twilight asked. "Oh, she took a walk outside," Charlotte clarified. Twilight calmed slightly. "Do you know why she took a walk?" Twilight asked. "Oh, yes. She said that she just wanted to kill some time while you spruced yourself up," Charlotte confirmed. Twilight nodded, seeing her answer was believable. She had been sprucing herself up for close to an hour, so it would make sense that she'd just go for a short walk. She was slightly worried about how she was going to pay for all of her new attire, though, seeing she didn't have Sunset's wallet with her at the moment. She just decided to wait and converse with Charlotte. "Well, until she gets back, I'm sorry, but I can't pay for this. She's the one with the money." "Oh, pfft," Charlotte cooed with a wave of her hand. "You're all good, dearie. I like having company every once in a while, seeing this store doesn't get much traffic." Twilight widened her eyes in surprise. Oh, well, then I'm glad I can be of company." Charlotte only smiled. "She's beautiful, you know," Charlotte said, causing Twilight to jump in surprise. "Huh?" "That girl. You're lucky to have her." Oh, we're not, you know, a thing. Just good friends." Charlotte shook her head. "I can see it in your eyes, dearie," Charlotte stated. "How you really feel. I saw it from the moment you walked in." "I think you're mistaken. Sunset is just a good friend. We're nothing more than that." There was hesitation in Twilight's response, and she had no idea why she was being hesitant. She wasn't lying or making up lies, so why was she stammering and struggling to get her words out? A blush had started to adorn her face in the mix of her contemplation. "Sunset. What a gorgeous name for someone as beautiful as she is," Charlotte complimented. "Say what you want, dear, but I've seen many faces like yours and I know what they mean." Twilight sighed. "You're wrong. Sunset is special. We'd never work," Twilight informed, keeping Sunset's true identity hidden. "Special or not, love is something that cannot be altered. If it's meant to be, it will happen," Charlotte replied. Twilight froze at the mention of the word love. It was something she'd never even considered or bat an eye at. However, something told her to stop and think for a second. Did she have any sort of feelings for Sunset? Was Charlotte right about her assumptions? While their first meet hadn't been the most pleasant, Sunset had saved her life twice and was in the process of saving her from some vampire out for her blood. She thought back to their conversation at the spring. She'd asked a specific question that Sunset had not been able to answer, because she had no specific answer. "What's so special about me that would make you, an immortal ancient vampire with immoral abilities beyond your kind, want to save me? It doesn't seem to make sense logically, seeing humans are the mortal enemy of your kind." "Well, if I'm being honest, I actually don't know exactly why." Maybe it's to settle a score with Moleskin once and for all? My past self making reckless decisions? Or perhaps my mother telling me something. Whatever the reason, I can say one thing, Twilight. I'm happy to have chosen to deceive my own kind, because I don't know what it is, but there's something special about you. There's something special about you. That line stuck out the most. It carried something that Twilight couldn't spell out, up until it clicked. She knew what Sunset had meant. Why else would Sunset be putting her life in danger for her safety? It wasn't to settle a score or to repair the past. Sunset had said herself that you cannot think or stay in the past in that conversation. Therefore, that left only one conclusion. Sunset is Her thoughts were interrupted upon the sound of a bell chime, Sunset standing in the doorway and appearing as if she were drunk. She stumbled and mumbled as she attempted to step further into the store, causing Twilight to grow worried. Sunset? Twilight stated worriedly. Sunset didn't respond. She just continued to stumble up until she lost all of her strength and collapsed to the floor with a hard crash. Sunset! Twilight shouted, rushing to Sunset's aid. She knew calling an ambulance was pointless, so she lifted Sunset into her arms and turned to Charlotte. I'll get her to a hospital. Go. Charlotte said softly. I'll hold these for you. Twilight could honestly care less about the clothes, but she just smiled and worked quickly back to the car where she settled Sunset into the passenger seat and took off to an unknown destination. Sunset woke with a gasp, looking around frantically at her surroundings. She was in a bed in what looked like a hotel room, another bed separated by a nightstand being enough of a confirmation. A flat-screen TV was turned onto the local news, to which Sunset paid no attention to, working her way to the edge of the bed. Twilight was nowhere to be found, but upon hearing the shower running, Sunset calmed down. Knowing she was safe as much as Twilight, she tried to recollect what happened to end her up in a hotel room. Ugh, what happened? She questioned, following with a grunt. I remember fighting Daikin, breaking down, lying back, then... A sudden onset of what happened after she had landed back in the alleyway flashed before her eyes. She had been met with a sudden strike of dizziness and pain. It was so bad that she couldn't walk straight and barely made it back to the entrance of the store. She immediately resorted to checking herself for any unhealed wounds, stripping herself of her clothing with haste. In her haste, Twilight had walked out of the bathroom with a towel wrapped around her, creating a potentially awkward scenario. Oh, good. You're a god! Sorry, am I interrupting something? Twilight apologized. Sunset turned her gaze away from her own body, meeting Twilight's instantly. No. I'm just checking for something, Sunset assured. You can look. You've seen me naked anyways, so it shouldn't be a shocking sight. I know. I just prefer to respect people's privacy, Twilight stated, walking over to the opposite bed to dress. What happened, by the way? You scared me for a minute. Sunset continued to search for any suspicious marks as she responded. I've got bad news. Sunset started. Our enemy has caught on. I had to take care of a couple problems to buy us more time. First thing in the morning, we are... Sunset stopped instantly upon the discovery of a bruised and ugly wound just below her cleavage. A wound she recognized. Shit! Sunset exclaimed. What's wrong? Twilight questioned with worry. Is it bad? Normally it would be, but I think I can heal it just fine. Sunset proposed. I just need some blood. Are you sure? Twilight questioned with genuine worry. Yeah, Sunset said, getting to her feet. I'll just go out and... A sudden exclamation of pain erupted from Sunset's mouth, following a collapse. Twilight, dressed in only her bra and panties, rushed to Sunset and quickly worked to find the root of the issue. Sunset, are you okay? She questioned, diving to the floor. Sunset grunted in pain as she attempted to get back to her feet. Shit! It's spreading faster than I thought. She choked out through heavy breaths and painful grunts. I need blood. Fast. What spread? Sunset, what's wrong? Twilight exclaimed fearfully. Sunset breathed heavily, managing to sit herself up against the side of the bed. In my absence, I ran into an old friend of mine, and, long story short, he and I ended up fighting to the death. I may have won, but the bastard snuck in some blows with his stinger, and now it's spreading, and if I don't get fresh blood soon, I'll die from the venom's effects. I need to. There's no way you can hunt like this, Twilight informed sternly. You can't even stand. If I don't, I'll die, Twilight. What else can I do? Twilight was close to throwing up at this sudden discovery and horrid truth, up until her own pulse reminded her that she was practically a meal for Sunset. Drink me, Twilight commanded, holding out her wrist. Sunset felt her stomach turn at that comment. Twilight? No! You don't know just how different human blood is from animal blood. I don't know if I could stop myself. I'll be fine, Sunset, Twilight assured. You need this right now, so I'm giving you permission to take enough to heal you. What if I can't stop myself? You'll be powerless against me. You will, Twilight said calmly. I know you will. Twilight, I don't want to hurt you. I'd rather die than... A sudden warm touch stopped Sunset instantly, her cold, lifeless lips being met with the embrace of Twilight's own. She didn't move. She just froze, allowing Twilight's warmth to shower her senses, up until the warmth left her. Twilight's eyes met hers as she held out her wrist again. I trust you. That was all Twilight said, preparing herself for Sunset's fangs to pierce her skin. Defeated and reassured, Sunset slowly took Twilight's arm in her hands and raised it to her mouth. She could smell her cocktail just beneath the surface, and the scent made her senses run wild. But somehow, she kept herself calm and aware of what she was doing. She didn't know what was keeping her sane, but she was thankful for it as she opened her mouth and flashed her two fangs in the light of the room. Then, with a gentle glide over Twilight's skin, she applied pressure. Twilight winced and let out a small whimper of pain at the pressure, but kept her breathing pace even as Sunset sank her fangs deeper and started to suck her blood. The pressure was unbelievable, feeling as if a vacuum with a suction force 100 times more powerful than a regular vacuum were pulling on her arm. It was nothing like she'd imagined a vampire bite would be like, She had expected more pain and bite force than she was experiencing. Sunset relished in the taste of Twilight's cocktail, feeling her pain reside with each intake. She was shocked at how well Twilight was handling it, not seeming to even move or anything from the amount of pressure she was currently putting on Twilight's arm. Never had she imagined that a human would have handled a bite so well, and she was glad that Twilight wasn't in pain. She would hate herself if she ever hurt Twilight. After the 9th intake of Twilight's blood, Sunset pulled away and opened her eyes to see Twilight with a smile on her face. A sight she hadn't expected. Her fangs glistened with a crimson tint as she receded them back into hiding, then met Twilight's gaze. A silence met the room as the two girls just stared at each other, eventually shifting into a new tone. Sunset leaned further into Twilight's gaze up until their lips met yet again, but this time, the embrace lasted, growing more passionate and true. In the mix of the embrace, the girls proceeded to shed their clothing and explore each other more intimately, kissing, caressing, and pleasuring one another into the night. It was a night that neither Sunset or Twilight would forget for the remainder of their lives. The night that for the first time in history, a vampire and human made love together.